They started whispering before he even stepped inside. The corridor lights hummed at a steady 60 hertz, casting long, sterile reflections across polished alloy walls as Commander Valthera slowed her pace just enough to listen, not with her ears, but with the subtle shifts in posture, the way elite soldiers held their breath a fraction too long, the way conversations died mid-sentence the moment a name surfaced. Deathworlder. The word didn't travel like sound, it moved like pressure, like a drop in atmosphere that made lungs hesitate. The station's gravity held at a comfortable 1G, yet something heavier pressed down on everyone present. Valthera had commanded fleets across 3 systems. She had seen creatures engineered for war and civilizations built on conquest. But this was different. This was fear without evidence. She stopped beside a transparent observation panel below her. A training ring lay empty, its surface still warm from recent drills, faint heat signatures fading. In the system display, "You've heard it too," one of her officers murmured, his silver blue skin dimming slightly, a subconscious response she didn't acknowledge. She kept her gaze forward, scanning the incoming transport logs. Earth origin flagged in red, classification 12, Deathworld, extreme biodiversity, unstable climate, high predator density, high microbial aggression. Valthera exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the panel for just a second before the environmental controls cleared it. "A myth grows louder when repeated," she said, though even to herself it sounded thinner than usual. The docking clamps engaged with a distant metallic thud reverberating through the structure. A shuttle no larger than 40 feet settled into bay 3. No escort, no defensive array, no visible armament. That alone drew attention. Elite warriors did not arrive unguarded. The bay doors parted with a controlled hiss, equalizing pressure as the figure stepped through. Average height, approximately 6 feet. No visible augmentations, no exosuit, just a standard fabric jacket worn at the seams, boots carrying the faint residue of dust from a world far less forgiving than this one. His posture was relaxed, not careless, but measured, as if every movement had already been calculated and discarded before execution. The whispers stopped, not faded, stopped like a switch had been flipped. Valthera felt it, then not danger, not yet, but the absence of noise that came before something significant. The man lifted his gaze briefly, not scanning, not assessing, simply observing, and for a moment the commander realized something unsettling. He wasn't reacting to them at all, he was adapting to the space itself. Temperature, airflow, distance between bodies. Exits within a 20-foot radius, all processed without visible effort. She stepped forward, her presence usually enough to command immediate attention, but he didn't stiffen, didn't defer, didn't challenge. He simply acknowledged her existence with a slight tilt of his head, respectful but unafraid. "Ethan Cross." The officer beside her read from the manifest, his voice lower than before. "Origin Earth." Valthera studied him, searching for the myth, the monster, the reason her entire command had fallen into silence, and found none. Just a man, no armor, no weapon, no visible threat. And yet the room remained still, because somewhere between the whispers and this moment something had already convinced them that he was not the most dangerous thing here. His world was the air in docking bay 3 did not return to normal after his arrival. It recalibrated. The ambient hum of the station systems seemed louder now, as if filling a silence no one dared to break. Ethan Cross stepped forward at an unhurried pace, his boots making soft contact against the alloy floor, each step measured, not cautious, not aggressive, simply efficient, the kind of movement that wasted nothing. Commander Valthera matched his approach, stopping exactly 6 feet away, close enough to establish authority, far enough to observe without intrusion. Her eyes traced details others might miss, the slight where along the edges of his jacket, the fine layer of dust embedded in the seams, the kind that did not come from sterile environments, but from open land, harsh land, the kind that shaped behavior more than training ever could. "You are far from your origin," she said, her voice even controlled, carrying across the stillness without effort. Ethan nodded, once a small motion acknowledging the obvious without adding weight. "So are you," he replied, his tone neutral, not challenging, not submissive, just present. Valthera felt a subtle shift behind her. The officers who had stood rigid moments ago adjusted their stance, not out of relaxation, but uncertainty. Their expectations had nothing to attach to, no display of dominance, no defensive posture, no indication of where the line was drawn, and that unsettled them more than hostility ever could. A soft chime echoed from the upper deck, signaling a routine systems check, the kind of background noise that usually went unnoticed, but now it sounded intrusive, almost inappropriate. Ethan's gaze flicked upward for a fraction of a second, not distracted, but cataloging the source, the timing, the distance. Then it returned to her, as if nothing had happened. Velthira noticed the precision of that moment and filed it away. "You were not escorted," she said, shifting the angle of the conversation. "No defensive unit, no diplomatic guard." Ethan glanced past her briefly, taking in the formation of elite soldiers arranged in a perfect semicircle, their armor polished, their presence deliberate. Did not seem necessary. He said the words simple, but not careless. There was no arrogance in them, only a quiet conclusion drawn long before he arrived. A faint murmur rippled through the line behind her, quickly suppressed, but not before she registered it. The reaction was not offense, it was confusion, the kind that came when expectations failed to align with reality. She stepped aside slightly, a gesture that opened the path deeper into the station, an invitation without surrender. "You will be processed through central intake," she said, watching closely to see how he would respond to direction. Ethan moved without hesitation, not rushing, not delaying. As he passed her position, the subtle current of displaced air carried with it the faint scent of something unfamiliar, not chemical, not synthetic, something organic, something that did not belong to controlled environments. Velthira turned to follow, maintaining a distance of exactly 10 feet. Her officers fell in behind her, their formation adjusting automatically, but the silence remained intact. No orders were given, none were needed. Ahead, the corridor stretched for nearly 200 feet, illuminated by evenly spaced panels casting a clean white light. Ethan walked through it, as if distance meant nothing, as if every step had already been accounted for long before he set foot on this station. And for the first time, Velthira understood what unsettled her. Command. It was not what he had done, it was what he had not needed to do at all. The intake corridor narrowed as they moved deeper into the station, the walls shifting from reflective alloy to matte composite, designed to absorb sound and limit echo. Every step Ethan took seemed quieter here, not because of the material, but because of how precisely his weight transferred heel to toe. Controlled, balanced, efficient. Commander Velthira watched the rhythm without appearing to, her gaze fixed forward, while her attention tracked everything about him, the way his shoulders remained loose but aligned, the way his head tilted slightly at each intersection, as if measuring distance without needing instruments. The central intake chamber opened ahead, a circular space nearly 50 feet across, illuminated by a ring of overhead panels that adjusted brightness based on movement. As Ethan stepped inside, the light shifted subtly, calibrating around him, as if the system itself hesitated for a fraction of a second before deciding how to respond. A transparent barrier hummed to life behind them, sealing the chamber with a low, steady tone. Environmental readouts flickered across the curved display wall. Temperature 72 degrees Fahrenheit, atmospheric pressure stable, oxygen levels optimal. Yet a secondary diagnostic line began to scroll. One Velthira had not seen triggered before: foreign particulate trace analysis, adaptive microbial scan active. She did not react outwardly, but she noted it carefully. Ethan stopped at the center of the chamber, exactly where the floor markings converged, not because he was told to, but because it was the logical place to stand. The alignment of space, the balance of exits, the clear line of sight in all directions. He placed his hands loosely at his sides, not restrained, not defensive, simply still. A technician stationed behind the upper console hesitated before initiating the scan, his four-fingered hand hovering just above the interface. "Proceed," Velthira said, her voice steady. The scan began with a soft cascade of light descending from the ceiling, not harsh, not invasive, just a gentle sweep, mapping structure density, thermal variation. Ethan did not move, his breathing remained slow. Even his heartbeat, displayed on the side panel, held a consistent rhythm, unremarkable in its steadiness, and that was what drew attention. No spike, no fluctuation, no sign of stress. Under observation, the system paused briefly, then resumed. Deeper layers activating neural pattern recognition, environmental adaptation, indexing. The technician leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as new data populated. "Commander," he said quietly, "baseline resilience metrics are inconsistent." Velthira did not look away from Ethan. "Define inconsistent." The technician swallowed once before continuing. "The system cannot establish a stable reference point. It keeps recalibrating, as if the subject has adapted to multiple extreme environments over time without degradation." Ethan's gaze drifted slightly to the side panel, not reading the data but aware of its presence. That a problem? He asked, his tone. Even the technician hesitated again, unsure how to answer a question that was not quite a challenge and not quite curiosity. Valthera stepped forward, closing the distance by exactly 2 feet. "It is unusual," she said. Ethan gave a small nod as if that confirmed something he already knew. The scan completed with a soft chime, the light retracting back into the ceiling, leaving the chamber unchanged except for the quiet tension that lingered. The display finalized its report, a single line appearing where complex analysis should have been. Adaptive threshold exceeded, no further classification available. Valthera read it once, then again, slower this time, not because she doubted it but because she understood what it implied. The system designed to categorize everything had reached a limit. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, a minimal adjustment that broke the stillness, just enough to remind them he was not part of the machinery. "So, what happens now?" he asked. Valthera met his eyes fully for the first time, not as a commander assessing a subject, but as something else, something closer to recognition. "Now," she said quietly, "we find out what that means." The chamber did not open immediately after the scan finished, and that delay stretched longer than protocol required, long enough for the silence to shift from observation into awareness. Ethan remained where he stood, not impatient, not expectant, just present, as if time itself had less weight where he came from. Commander Valthera watched the system logs continue to update in quiet loops, attempting to resolve a pattern that refused to settle. The phrase "adaptive threshold exceeded" remained fixed at the center of the display, like a statement the station could not retract. She turned slightly toward the upper console. "Release the barrier," she said. The technician hesitated only for a fraction of a second before complying. The transparent field dissolved with a soft descending tone, the air moving subtly as pressure equalized. Ethan stepped forward without waiting for instruction, again, not defiant, simply aligned with the natural flow of movement. The corridor beyond the chamber felt different now, narrower, though its dimensions had not changed. The lighting adjusted as he entered, lowering intensity by 3%, an automatic response to reduce visual strain, but Valthera noted the timing. It had not triggered for any other subject that day. She moved beside him, this time not behind, matching his pace, within a foot of distance, close enough to sense the faint shifts in his breathing, the steady cadence that never broke. "You adapted quickly," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. Ethan glanced at her briefly, then forward again. "To what?" he asked, not dismissive, just precise. Valthera considered the question and found no simple answer. "To this environment," she said after a moment. "Most require orientation adjustments." Ethan's gaze flicked toward a wall panel where a maintenance seam ran along the surface, barely visible unless you were looking for it. "Feels stable," he replied, the word simple, but carrying an implication she could not ignore. Stability was not something given, it was something recognized by those who had experienced the opposite. They reached an intersection where 3 corridors branched at exact 90-degree angles, each extending at least 100 feet in length. A group of junior officers approached from the left, their formation loose, their conversation low, until they noticed the commander and the human. Their voices stopped mid-sentence, posture tightening. Instantly one of them shifted slightly to the side, creating a clear path. Not ordered, not requested, just done. Ethan did not acknowledge the gesture directly, but his path adjusted by less than an inch, enough to pass, without contact, without disruption. Valthera observed the exchange closely. The officers did not look at him, not fully. Their eyes moved past him, around him, as if direct focus might reveal something they were not prepared to understand. Once they had passed, the corridor returned to its quiet hum, but the absence lingered behind them like a space that had been briefly occupied by something undefined. "They expect something from you," Valthera said. Ethan exhaled slowly, the first visible sign of change, though even that was controlled. "They expect a story," he replied. She turned her head slightly, studying the side of his face, the calm lines, the lack of tension. "And what are you?" she asked. Ethan's steps did not slow. "Just the part they have not seen yet," he said, the words settling into the space between them with a weight that did not come from volume. Ahead, the corridor opened into a wider section leading toward the observation deck, the light there brighter, clearer, designed to simulate open space rather than containment. Ethan paused for the first time since entering the station, not because he was uncertain, but because he was choosing where to stand. Valthera stopped beside him, following his line of sight through the transparent wall beyond. The station curved gently, revealing the vast dark beyond, scattered with distant points of light. Silent, constant. Ethan looked at it for a long moment, then spoke, without turning. "Back home the sky never stays like that." He said. Valthera felt something shift again, not in the room, not in the system, but in the understanding forming piece by piece. "What does it do?" she asked quietly. Ethan's reflection in the glass moved slightly as he adjusted his stance. "It reminds you to keep moving," he said, and for the first time since he arrived, Valthera realized the station was not the environment he was adapting to, it was the one he was choosing to slow down. In the observation deck remained quiet long after his words settled into it, the stars beyond the transparent wall holding their distant positions, unchanged, indifferent to the station, the command structure, or the quiet tension between two species trying to understand each other. Ethan Cross did not move immediately. He stood with his weight balanced, evenly, feet planted at a natural distance, shoulders relaxed, as if this stillness was not foreign, but chosen. Commander Valthera studied him, without pretense, now no longer filtering her attention through rank or protocol, but through something more precise: curiosity, shaped by restraint. "Your world requires constant motion," she said, her voice low enough to belong to the space rather than interrupt it. Ethan gave a slight nod, his reflection shifting in the glass. "It teaches it early," he replied. Valthera turned her gaze outward, following his line of sight, the stars arranged in silent patterns, the station drifting in controlled orbit, every variable accounted for, every system predictable. "Here, everything is stabilized," she said. "Temperature controlled, gravity fixed, atmosphere filtered. No sudden shifts." Ethan's eyes moved across the horizon line where the curvature of the station met open space. "Yeah, I noticed," he said, the faintest hint of something unreadable in his tone. Not criticism, not approval, just recognition. A soft alert tone chimed from the upper panel, indicating routine cycle rotation, environmental systems recalibrating light intensity by a fractional margin. Valthera watched Ethan's posture during the shift, the way his muscles adjusted without visible effort, as if his body responded to change before his mind needed to register it. "You do that often," she said. Ethan glanced at her briefly. "Do what?" he asked. "Adjust before the change completes," she clarified. He looked back at the glass, considering for a moment. "Where I am from, if you wait for things to settle, you are already behind," he said, the statement simple but layered with something deeper than training. Valthera felt that again, the subtle realignment of understanding, not fear, not yet, but the erosion of certainty, the belief that control came from designing environments rather than surviving them. Footsteps approached from behind, measured, but less controlled than the elite units from earlier. A younger officer paused at the threshold of the deck, clearly unsure whether to interrupt. "Commander," he said carefully, "Central Command requests a status update on the human subject." Valthera did not turn immediately, her focus still on Ethan. "Observation ongoing," she replied. "No anomalies requiring intervention." The officer hesitated. "There are concerns regarding classification failure," he added. Valthera allowed herself a slight shift in stance, turning just enough to acknowledge him. "Then they may continue to be concerned," she said evenly. The officer straightened, instinctively nodding once before retreating, the sound of his steps fading back into the corridor. Ethan exhaled softly, the breath barely visible in the controlled environment. "They like categories," he said. Valthera returned her attention to him. "It allows for prediction," she replied. Ethan's lips pressed into the faintest line. "Not quite a smile, does it?" he said, not dismissive, just questioning. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked back to the stars. "It usually does," she said, the word usually carrying more weight than the sentence itself. A subtle vibration passed through the deck as the station adjusted its orbital position, a minor correction, less than half a degree, but enough to shift the angle of the stars beyond the glass. Ethan noticed immediately, his head tilting slightly, tracking the change. Valthera watched that reaction closely, the precision, the timing, the absence of hesitation. "Your environment moves," she said. Ethan nodded. "Once, all the time," he replied. She considered that, then asked the question that had been forming since the moment he stepped into the station. "And you trust yourself to keep up with it?" Ethan finally turned fully toward her, the distance between them unchanged, but the focus sharper, now more direct. "I do not trust it to stay the same," he said quietly, the words settling into the controlled air of the observation deck, like something that did not belong to stability. And for the first time, Valthera understood that what her people called unpredictable was simply what his people called normal. The observation deck lights dimmed by another fractional degree as the station entered a Scheduled energy redistribution cycle, a change so minor most inhabitants would never notice. But Ethan Cross shifted his stance by less than an inch, adjusting balance before the system completed its transition. Commander Valthera did not miss it. She had begun to recognize the pattern, not a reaction, not even anticipation, but something deeper, a constant readiness that did not require conscious effort. Your body prepares before confirmation, she said quietly. Ethan kept his gaze on the stars, though. His focus was no longer distant. It had narrowed slightly, as if the environment itself had become part of his awareness. It is easier that way, he replied. Valthera folded her hands behind her back, the posture formal, but her attention anything but routine. Easier to assume instability, she said. Ethan's reflection in the glass shifted as he turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. Easier than being surprised by it. He answered the words, simple, yet carrying a weight that did not belong to this controlled space. A soft pulse moved through the deck, not mechanical, not part of standard operations. Valthera felt it through the floor, a vibration that did not match any scheduled system report. Her eyes moved instantly to the overhead panel, where a faint amber indicator flickered once, then again, irregular, not alarming, but not expected either. Ethan noticed the same moment, his posture changing in a way that was almost imperceptible to anyone else, his shoulders lowering slightly, his center of gravity settling as if the ground beneath him had become less certain. That was not your system, he said. Valthera did not respond immediately, her gaze already scanning the data feed that began to populate across the side display. Micro fluctuations in external field stability, minor but persistent, no immediate threat classification. She tapped a command, and the station's environmental readout expanded, showing subtle variations in pressure gradients, less than 1%, but increasing. We are adjusting, she said, more to the system than to him. Ethan's eyes moved across the panel, not reading the symbols, but tracking the pattern of change. No, you are reacting, he said. Valthera felt a brief tension rise, not from offense, but from the accuracy of the statement. She issued a directive through her neural link requesting a full diagnostic sweep of the outer hull and surrounding space. The response came back within seconds: negative for structural compromise, negative for external interference, and yet the fluctuation remained steady, persistent. Ethan took a single step forward, closing the distance to the glass, his hand not touching it, but hovering just short of the surface, as if measuring something intangible. Feels like a shift, he said. Valthera joined him again, maintaining that precise 1-foot spacing. Define shift, she asked. Ethan tilted his head slightly, listening not with his ears, but with something else, something trained by experience rather than instruments, like pressure building somewhere you cannot see yet. He replied, the words calm, but carrying an edge that had not been there before. Valthera initiated a deeper scan, overriding standard filters, and for the first time the system hesitated, a delay of less than half a second, but enough to register. When the data finally resolved, a new line appeared at the base of the display: external field variance, origin undetermined, projection unstable. The station around them remained visually unchanged. The stars held their positions, the light steady, the air controlled, and yet something had shifted beneath all of it, something the system could not fully define. Ethan lowered his hand slightly, his posture settling into that same quiet readiness. Where I am from, he said without looking at her. This is the part where things stop pretending to be stable. Valthera felt the meaning settle deeper than the words she had trusted. Systems designed to predict, to categorize, to control, but now she was standing beside someone who had learned to live without that certainty, and as the subtle vibration passed through the deck again, slightly stronger this time, she realized the station was no longer the most reliable thing in the room. The vibration did not fade this time. It layered onto itself, a second pulse following the first, slightly out of sync, like two systems trying to correct each other and failing to agree. The observation deck lights flickered once, not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to shift shadows across the polished floor. Commander Valthera's gaze snapped to the upper display, where new data streams began to cascade faster than before, overlapping diagnostics, attempting to isolate a source that refused to resolve. Ethan Cross did not look at the panels. He did not need to. His attention remained forward, but his stance changed again, subtle but undeniable. His feet adjusted by a fraction, widening just enough to anchor his center. His shoulders angled slightly, as if aligning with something unseen. It is accelerating, Valthera said, her voice controlled though the words carried more weight. Now the system responded with a series of soft chimes as additional subsystems engaged: environmental stabilizers, field regulators, structural monitors, all reporting within acceptable thresholds. And yet the fluctuation continued. Ethan's head tilted just enough to catch the rhythm of it, not random, not chaotic. Something in between. It is not trying to break anything, he said. Valthera turned to him sharply. Then what is it doing? She asked. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, focusing on a point beyond the glass where the stars remained unchanged, but the space between them felt different, somehow tighter, less distant. It is looking for balance, he replied, the answer quiet but precise. Another pulse moved through the deck, stronger this time, enough to register as a slight shift in footing for those unprepared. Valthera compensated instantly, her training flawless, but she noticed the difference in Ethan. He did not compensate after the movement. He moved with it, as if the shift had already been accounted for before it happened. Central Command is requesting immediate containment protocols. The voice came through her neural link, sharper, now edged with urgency. They are detecting instability across multiple sectors. Valthera did not respond immediately, her focus locked on Ethan. Define containment, she asked silently. The reply came without hesitation. Isolation of the human subject until classification parameters can be re-established. Her gaze hardened slightly, not in anger, but in decision. She looked at Ethan, standing there, not resisting, not reacting, simply present in a way the station itself was beginning to struggle to maintain. Negative, she transmitted back, her tone leaving no space for interpretation. Continue observation. There was a pause on the line, longer than protocol allowed, before the response returned. Commander, this exceeds standard. She cut the transmission with a single command, the connection severing cleanly. The silence that followed felt heavier than the vibration itself. Ethan exhaled slowly, the breath measured as his gaze returned from the distant horizon to the interior of the deck. They want to put me somewhere controlled, he said, not asking. Valthera stepped closer, reducing the distance between them to less than a foot. Now the boundary no longer formal, but deliberate. They want to understand what they cannot categorize, she replied. Ethan gave a slight nod. That usually ends the same way, he said. Valthera studied him carefully. And how is that? She asked. Ethan's expression did not change, but something in his posture settled, deeper, more certain. They try to control the wrong thing, he said. Another pulse moved through the station, this one accompanied by a low resonance that echoed faintly through the structure. The stars beyond the glass remained fixed, but the space around them seemed to ripple almost imperceptibly. Valthera felt it, then not through the floor, not through the systems, but through the realization forming beneath all of it. The station was not losing stability. It was adjusting to something it had never been designed to handle, and standing beside her was the only individual who did not seem surprised by that truth. The resonance deepened, not louder but fuller, as if the station itself had begun to listen instead of correct. The observation deck panels shifted tone by less than a degree, the light no longer perfectly uniform, a subtle gradient forming across the floor. Commander Valthera felt it in the way her balance settled, not compensating now, but aligning without instruction. Ethan Cross stood with the same quiet steadiness, his breathing unchanged, his gaze no longer fixed on the distant stars, but on the reflection layered over them. The station superimposed against the void. It found a rhythm, he said. Valthera followed his focus. The display, still streaming diagnostics, still searching for a cause, yet the pattern beneath the numbers had begun to repeat, not random, not failing, a cadence emerging where none should exist. Our systems are not reporting a source, she said. Ethan gave a small nod. Does not mean there is not one, he replied. Another pulse moved through the structure, smoother this time, less jarring, more like a transition than a disruption. Valthera opened a direct channel to Central Command, the connection forming instantly. The voices on the other side sharper, now crowded with overlapping reports. Field variance has propagated to adjacent sectors. One voice said, stabilizers are holding, but not converging. Another added, recommend immediate isolation of all anomalous inputs. Valthera did not answer right away. She watched Ethan instead, the way he shifted a fraction to the left, then stilled as the next pulse passed exactly where he had moved from. You are mapping it, she said. Ethan did not deny it. Just listening, he answered. There is a difference. Valthera's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus. Explain it. she said. Ethan lifted his hand a few inches from his side, not touching anything, not indicating a panel, just marking space. Mapping tries to define it, he said. Listening lets it tell you where it wants to settle. The words hung between them as the next wave moved through the deck, even smoother than before. The overhead lights adjusted in response, not correcting now, but following the shift. A delayed echo of the pattern. Valthura felt a realization form, not in the data but in the behavior around her. The station had stopped forcing stability and had begun to accommodate change. Central command, she said into the open channel, cease active correction on Deck 7, route stabilization to passive observation only. There was a brief silence, then a sharp response. Commander, that contradicts. She cut in calmly. Execute. A pause followed, then compliance. The channel dimmed as the directive propagated through the system. Ethan lowered his hand, the air around it unchanged. Yet the next pulse passed with less resistance, the deck barely registering the transition. Valthura exhaled slowly, the first breath she had allowed to lengthen since the fluctuation began. It is stabilizing, she said. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, he replied. It is finding a balance. We are just not in the way anymore. The distinction settled deeper than any report. The displays began to clear, lines of error resolving into neutral states, not because the system had corrected them, but because the condition they described no longer conflicted with operation. Valthura turned to him fully, the distance between them now irrelevant. What are you? She asked, not as a classification, but as a question that had outgrown categories. Ethan met her gaze, steady, unguarded. Someone who grew up where nothing stays the same. He said, the answer quiet but complete. Another pulse moved through the station, this one almost imperceptible. The lights holding steady, the floor unmoving, the stars beyond unchanged. And yet everything felt different, not because the instability was gone, but because it was understood. Valthura looked back at the glass, at the vast field of distant light, then at the reflection beside her, and realized the system had not adapted to the anomaly, it had adapted to him. The station settled into a quiet that was not the same as before, not empty, not controlled, but aware. The systems no longer chased stability, they held it lightly, allowing the subtle cadence to pass through without resistance. Commander, Valthura stood beside Ethan Cross, and for the first time since his arrival, she did not measure distance, she did not track posture, she simply remained. The observation deck lights held steady at 70% output, the temperature constant at 72 degrees Fahrenheit, yet everything felt recalibrated, not by command, but by understanding. The display panels cleared their warnings one by one until only a single line remained: field variance, integrated status, nominal. Valthura read it once, then let it go, her attention returning to the reflection in the glass. Ethan's silhouette layered over the stars beyond, still unremarkable in form, still absent of any visible augmentation. And yet the station had changed around him, as if presence alone had introduced a variable it could not ignore. Central command confirms normalization across all sectors. The report came through her link, quieter, now the urgency gone, replaced by something closer to caution. They are requesting a full debrief on the interaction parameters. Valthura did not answer immediately. She watched Ethan instead, the way he shifted his weight back to a neutral stance, the subtle readiness easing, not disappearing but settling into the background like a habit that never fully left. You will give them one, Ethan said, not as a question. Valthura allowed a small exhale. I will give them what they can understand, she replied. Ethan's gaze moved back to the stars, the vast field unchanged yet no longer distant in the same way that usually is not much. He said there was no bitterness in it, only familiarity. Valthura turned fully toward him, now the last trace of formal distance gone. They will ask what you did, she said. Ethan considered that for a moment, his expression calm, his posture steady. I did not do anything, he answered. I just did not fight the change. Valthura felt the weight of that settle deeper than any system report, the idea that control was not always applied, sometimes it was withheld. She looked back at the display, at the clean lines of data, the absence of error, and realized how much of their understanding depended on forcing systems to match expectation. Where I am from, she said slowly, we design environments to remove uncertainty. Ethan nodded once. Where I am from, we learn to live with it, he replied. The difference between those statements stretched wider than the station itself, yet in this moment they existed side by side, not in conflict, but in contrast. The observation deck remained still, no further pulses, no shifts, no alerts. and yet the memory of them lingered not as a threat, but as a lesson. Valthera stepped closer until there was no measurable distance left between them, not an assertion of authority, not a surrender of it, simply alignment. "You are not what they expected," she said. Ethan's reflection shifted slightly as he turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. "Neither is your station." He replied, the words quiet but precise. Valthera allowed a faint change in expression, not quite a smile, but something close. "Then perhaps the expectation was the error," she said. Ethan looked back to the stars again, the endless field of light, steady, distant, constant, and yet no longer static in the same way. "Expectations are just guesses that forgot they were guesses," he said, the lines settling into the silence that followed. No alarms, no commands, no corrections. Just a station holding its balance, and a commander standing beside a human who had never needed it to stay still for him to understand it. Valthera did not speak again. She did not need to. The answer was already there, in the quiet, in the absence of reaction, in the way the systems no longer struggled to define him. And for the first time, since the whispers began, the silence was not fear, it was recognition.